start the recording, and I'm going to start our program. So hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Fisher, your host and moderator for the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive biweekly Zoom program of March 26, 2025. So let's see here. Here we go. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad everybody is here. We've got a really great program today, actually, and we've got kind of a 2-for-1 special because we'll have a quick guest presentation from the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society. So we've got a busy calendar. You know, it's spring and calendar times are busy. So I just kind of want to update people on some of the events here in the Pacific Northwest area. April 5th, April 12th, former Milwaukee Road, Seattle and North Coast employee Frank Zellerhoff and I will be doing a series of Saturday presentations. Saturday, April 5th, we will be at the Vashon Island Museum. And of course, people said, oh, well, you don't want attendance if you're going to have it on Vashon Island. And I said, well, you know, Frank has lived on Vashon Island his whole life. And so this will be a chance for all of his friends and family to be there and see one of his programs. April 12th, then Frank and I will be back at one of my regular partners, the Highline Heritage Museum, which is about a block and a half west of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive office in Burien, Washington. Coming up on the program, well, we had a real successful time at Winter Rail. Cascade Rail Foundation supported that, and a nice turnout, and a place to go and see and be seen, I would say. Coming up on our schedule, we've got on April 9th, a new presenter for us, George Lee. And George is involved in the restoration of the former Northern Pacific Depot in Cheney, Washington. So I could tell you, as being someone that manages a depot myself, managing depots, I would just simply say that's tons of fun, literally. April 23rd, Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive Board President and founder of Cascade Rail Foundation, Russell Holter, will be with us. And Russ is going to be talking about how Cascade Rail Foundation got started, how we ended up preserving a depot in Cle Elum. We also have a locomotive that's undergoing restoration, and we've got one of the last remaining Milwaukee Road substations that we work with Washington State Parks. May 7th. Now, May 7th is a little bit of an exception because, you know, I like to do live programming with a live audience and live material. In this case, we're going to make an exception because we're going to be honored to have Dr. Frank Shear of the Railway Mail Service, and he's going to be doing a program on mail trains in Wallace, Idaho. Now, Dr. Shear, the Railway Mail Service, their volunteer hours coincide with our meeting. So for him to be able to do this, I'm going to have to pre-record him because he has a commitment during our normal program time. May 21st, my dear friend Royal W. Gelder, formerly of the Southern Pacific, will be with us, and he's going to talk again about the restoration of the Rock Island Golden State route from Kansas City through Tucumcari, New Mexico. Now, we had that program on about 3 years ago, I think, something like that, and it would be worth revisiting that. June 4th, again, another friend of mine. These are all friends of mine. Robert W. Scott is going to be on. Robert is involved in what started out with something called Virtual Rail Fan. That's evolved for him into something called Steel Highways. He's involved in 3 different video cameras around the Pacific Northwest that record trains, real trains going by. So if you want to watch a train and not get out of your armchair, he's the guy that makes that a possibility. So he's going to talk about how this virtual rail fanning thing has evolved and the different projects and what some of the differences are and what this camera and that camera and the other camera and blah, blah, blah are all like. So, coming back to today's program with J. Craig Thorpe with an intro by Jim Trunzo, the last couple of weeks, I've been describing this program as a cooking show where we're going to learn how people do things. And our June 18th program, which will be the last one that we have before we take our summer break, will be featuring former PNRA board president Robert, or what we always call him, Bob Kelly. And Bob Kelly is going to be doing a presentation on how to publish a railroad book. In fact, Bob and I and Tim Repp are going to be going down to Centralia tomorrow, assuming Centralia survives the meteorological tumult scheduled for tonight. And we're working on a book with Tim Repp, his second edition. So Bob's going to talk about what's the process that people need to go through to be able to actually create a book that ends in print. Now, this is, and he'll talk about the difference between how institutions handle it, and then you give the copyright to them versus you keep the copyright yourself, and so on and so forth. So, so that should be a very interesting program that we'll finish off the summer with. The fall already looks full. We've only got 9 dates for fall, and I've got a number of hooks in the water that are actively getting chomped on. So we're going to have some great programming this fall. So I am going to unpin myself, and I'm going to turn this over to Jim Trunzo. Jim, I'm looking around my audience to see where you are.
I'm right here.
Oh, well, there you are. Okay, well, why don't you share your screen and tell us about the fun that we had last weekend at the Regional Pennsylvania Railroad Convention. Go ahead, please.
Okay, let's see if the technology works today.
Knock on wood.
I am Okay, let me get this guy out of the. There we go. Let me get to the slideshow from the beginning. Well, how about that? So last Saturday we had a meeting of the Pacific Northwest chapter of the PRRTNHS. But coincidentally, it turned out that the New England chapter, headquartered in New England, had their meeting as well, and they had a very interesting speaker, as did we. And so I floated the idea of, why don't we try and see if we can do this together and see how our members respond. So, they're on East Coast, we're on West Coast, so we had a little bit of a time adjustment. We normally start at noon, and they normally start at 1 o'clock, and so we made some adjustments. We started at 11, and it ran fairly smooth. We were done by 3 o'clock, so that was 6 o'clock for the New England guys. A little bit longer, but it all worked out, and I think it was well received. And I wanted to point out that the New England chapter had the author Albert Chirella make a presentation on his 3-set book of the history of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and it's basically from day one to the last day in 1968. And he's a very good presenter, and his books are just chock-a-block full of detail. There were 3 of them. If you add volumes 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to say they were 2,700 pages. He claims more than 40 million words.
Oh, great.
And what's very interesting is that he's not just, this is the horseshoe curve and this is a steam locomotive guy, the kind of typical stuff you might hear. He talks about how the company interacted with the public, the presidents with the government with the railroad. And when you talk about things like dieselization, which was his topic for this particular meeting, he talked a little bit about diesels, but what he really talked about, which I found was quite interesting, was how the presidents of the railroad at the time viewed dieselization and why they viewed it that way, and the impact of taking coal suppliers' traffic out of the equation. About 40% of the railroad's coal traffic was internal. And I'll just give you one technical tidbit. If you look at the energy utilization of a steam engine, that is all the energy in the coal and then the percentage of that energy that's reported to the wheels, it's about 7%. Well, if you look at diesel oil and apply the same thing to diesel engines, it's about 24%, and the availability, the amount of time you can actually do useful work, is more than double. A diesel engine's like a car. You put the key in and away you go. So this was all very interesting. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about his books, you can look at them on Amazon. Just look for Albert Chirella, or they're in the University of Indiana Press website. So this is just more about him. He's a history teacher, educator, and his major interest is railroads. For the Pacific Northwest chapter, we have a member named Bill Myers, and he is a highly detail-oriented fellow, and he presented a presentation on steam switchers, the so-called A, Bs, and Cs, because A, B, and C Pennsylvania engine types were switcher engines. And he had pictures, he had a lot of interesting pieces of information, and he's a founding member of our chapter, and he's a retired, actually, Navy submarine officer, and he was a BNSF locomotive engineer and an HO modeler. So if you ever want to sit down and have an interesting topic about a guy who's had his topics from a guy who had his hands on the throttle, he's an interesting fellow. So we had both presentations. We had a little bit of a technical glitch, but it was interesting because we had cross-country troubleshooting on how to resolve it. So how did we do? Well, I think everybody liked it. Jonathan was there, and he can
a testimonial, dear friends.
Yeah, give a testimonial. The presentations were both good, and the speakers were all interesting to hear because they were knowledgeable and they spoke clearly.
And they knew their stuff, and it was interesting.
Yeah, and so, if you ask the question, well, should we do it again? I think we will, and I'll talk to our board at the next meeting. There's, some wiggling and jiggling you might have to do to get some alignment with meetings. But the interesting thing is that every chapter has a library of presentations that they've made and forgot about. And this would be a way to present them to a wider audience and provide more information. So, yeah, at the end of the day, we liked it. But another interesting thing happened. I had pointed out to Jonathan that this was our 13th year of meeting at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. And the archive has all its time, 3 times a year, donated space and whatever other support we needed, and wanted to make a public thank you for that effort. And we've also had a kind of interesting relationship in that things that are of Pennsylvania Railroad nature that come through the archive in Burien, they're deassessed and then given to us. And I have sent some of the materials to our archive in Lewistown, PA.
Premium Medicare partners, how are you getting?
Hang on, I'll deal with that.
Okay. So, and it was very interesting because in one case we had in files from an electrical engineer who was a inspector during the erection of the mainline catenary. And not only did we get some unique drawings, we got some very unique notes. So that was that's all great, and we do appreciate it. I also just happened to bring out on my laptop some slides of our first meeting, and Jonathan suggested this group might be interested in some of them. So
trip down memory lane here, folks. Gary, look at you.
Yeah, so there's Gary Tarbox, and this is in 2012, I believe. And so this is the archive, and it's almost as received condition, if you will. And here we are in the basement. You can see things are not like they are today. And the fella at the right with his arms stretched out, Woody Matthews, who has since left us, he's making some very important point to Gary Tarbox. I'm not sure what it was. So here we are again. You can see rather unfinished again. And one last time. So if you've been down there recently, you can see there's been a whole lot of change. And now on to the Boeing Railroad Club. Here's Byron Osborne doing some kind of work. It looks like he's repairing cars. And if you look at the layout, it's in a very, very much early condition. So here again. And it wouldn't be good for us unless we had a Pennsylvania Railroad engine on the track. So there you go. And that's it. And so any comments, questions? I'll be happy to answer them.
Well, I thought that was pretty darn interesting. And I know I really got a kick out of it last Saturday when you started showing some of these pictures. So that was all a good thing. And Jim, thanks for taking a minute. And if we could ever get Bill Myers on this program, I would love it because his presentations are just very detailed, very organized. And, you'd be surprised how all the little differences in like Pennsylvania switch engines and stuff like that. So,
well,
go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment. As a former engineer and a railroad or a Navy officer, he's a pretty organized guy.
He's a really organized guy. So, and a lot of fun to be around. So you can unshare your screen now, Jim. And now we're going to move things along. Thanks, Jim, by the way. I appreciate you doing that on short notice for us and giving some people an idea of what's going on. And stepping into the on deck circle now is our main presenter today, J. Craig Thorpe, and we're going to walk with Craig as we get him logged in and get his presentation on the road. Okay, you doing okay, Craig?
Okay, so we'll click share.
Share, correct. Find your PowerPoint.
And I guess that would be this one.
And I don't mind telling you folks that we've got a few of Craig's fans in the audience. In fact, what I'm going to do quick while we're getting ready here, while Craig's getting ready.
Yeah. where do I go from here? I clicked on that one.
You click on share and then you select your program, and then it should come popping up on the screen.
So I'll click this. Oh, hit that share. Okay, the blue
There
share.
we go.
There we
There
go.
we go. Okay, so hold your fire just for a second, Craig.
Okay.
I just got something I need to do real quick because we got the audience all together today. So I'm just going to go around the country quick because we got people from I think all the time zones except Hawaii today. So I'm going to start out with Patrick Durand, one of your big fans. And Pat, what's the weather like in Wasilla, Alaska? You got to unmute.
The thermometer on the sunny side of the building is 80 degrees.
In March.
There is no snow. The guys are working outside stripping paint right now off pipe.
There you go. And I got a choice for the Rose City, so I'm going to go with Roy Hemingway. Roy, what's it like in the Rose City today there, sir?
It's very sunny, but by 5 o'clock, we are expected to have thunderstorms and maybe even a tornado.
Yes, that's right. Dan Cupper in the great state of Pennsylvania. Now, it sounded like it was pretty nice weather where you're at today, sir.
Yeah, it was one of those days where if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes because the sun was in and out. The wind was up and down. We had snow. We had a little bit of rain. So it's one of those typical spring days.
Typical spring day. Well put, sir. And thank you for being in our audience today. And by the way, for those that are maybe new to our program, if you'd like to come back to a future episode, all you have to do is just drop your information into the chat, and I'll add you to our list for a future program. Joel McCurry, Cary, North Carolina. What's it like there, sir?
We've got 61 degrees, sunny. The weeds are growing. I had to get my lawnmower out and cut some of those. And the pollen is falling. And like Henry Ford said, if you can have a car of any color as long as it's yellow.
Okay, so and then off to the great state of California and my dear friend Gordon Clattenburg in Santa Clarita, California. Gordon.
Hello. Today it's 60 degrees and overcast. This is about 25 degrees colder than it was yesterday.
Yeah, we had a warm day yesterday and not so much here today as well. Steve,
Can I ask Gordon a question?
What's that?
Could I ask Gordon a question, please?
Sure, go right ahead.
Gordon, do you ever go out and watch NCIS being filmed in your territory?
I'm sorry, watch what?
NCIS, they film in your area.
A TV show.
Obviously not.
Oh, okay.
All right, so the answer is no, but good question. And then lastly, Steve Howes in the Tri-Cities. What's it like over there? And what's your forecast for tonight? Do you know?
We're all currently at 73 degrees and sunny, predicted high of 78. And I think it's supposed to cloud up and cool off tomorrow. But all in all, it's pretty nice weather.
Very good. And thanks, everybody, for always chiming in on that. And I'm going to now pin Craig Thorpe to our screen. And one thing that we should all do, I've been having a little bit of buffering problem the last couple of days with meetings. So if we could all turn our cameras off and mute, that would be swell. In fact, I'm going to mute right now and turn it over to today's special guest, my dear friend, J. Craig Thorpe. Craig, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan, and everybody else. I appreciate the chance to have been in front of you all a couple of times over the last couple of years, and I wanted to give credit to Dan Cupper for being the inspiration for this collection of images you'll see today. Over the years, Dan and I have shared many things back and forth. And one of the ideas that Dan brought up was kind of responding to people's questions of me of, well, how do you do these things? How do you do these paintings? So we put some ideas together, and that was the locus of the start. So what I'm going to be doing today is sort of giving you an overview of the studio. If you were to walk in the front door and go downstairs to my man cave, I'll show you what the space looks like. And there are, I think, half a dozen, 7 pictures, and I'll relate to some of the mechanics of what I do in that space. And then I'll shift the focus to look at 4 different pieces of railroad art. And I'll walk you through the production for all 4, and then conclude with another half a dozen of some relatively recent pieces. So we're going to start then by having you walk into the studio. This home that Kathy and I have, we've lived in since what was it, 87 or something like that. And one of the 2 family rooms was just a perfect space for a studio. So I have a number of flat files, some of which you see there off to the right, a couple of different easels. One is to the left with things stacked up on it. Just a couple comments about some of the model trains that you see around here. The interurban train on the mantle is actually a rebuild that I started when I was in high school and college. A friend of mine gave me some old Lionel standard gauge passenger cars, and I turned them into interurbans. So I get to run those around the Christmas tree every year. I named it the Lehigh and Harmony after Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley Transit and the Harmony route. Off to the right is a box with some model trains in it and a conductor's cap sitting there on the edge. Those are some models that I started building when I was a teenager of the East Broad Top. East Broad Top is the real beginning of a lot of elements of my story. So when I redid this space, my kid said, "Dad, you got to put those models out there." So that's where they live right now. And then on the conference table is a Bud RDC, and that references the beginnings of my rail interest. When I was about 6 years old, my grandfather took me on the Bud cars from Pittsburgh to McKeesport. That was about, Dan, how many miles is that? I don't even remember. Dan, well, anyhow, it was a relatively short ride, but a lot of fun. And I was so small I couldn't even look out the front or the end windows. The conductor had to hold me up and pick me up and point out stuff. So that was the beginning of much of my railroad interest. And my family bought me a set of the Lionel O-gauge RDCs for Christmas a few years ago. And so this is a prominent place. So we're turning around from that. We see another part of the room with books and more flat files and shelves and sort of a mini gallery with those folding panels that can flip back and forth. And I get the chance to bring people into the studio on occasion. And if any of you guys are interested, come give me a shout, and we'll get the latte machine going, and we can sit around and talk trains. I mentioned easels. Off to the right is one, and Pat, you ought to recognize that painting, 557.
For sure.
Yeah. And then off to the left is my main desk, and behind that, or to the right side of the picture, is sort of a work table, credenza kind of stuff. And off to the left, that table serves for the drawing functions that I do, as well as the painting functions. And go in the wrong direction there. One more time, please. So I do a number of drawings, and some of you folks will remember some of the architectural style drawings that have been a part of my railroad career. All that started when I did architectural art for landscape architects and architects in Virginia. Well, I do these basic pencil drawings, sometimes add color to it, before I go to an ink drawing and then add color to that. So what you see here is the beginning of a commission for the High-Speed Rail Alliance out of Chicago. Rick Harnish is the executive director, and Rick has commissioned a number of pieces from me over the years. This was the beginning sketches for one of the Detroit setting of Michigan Central, you know, the building now that Ford has taken over. So off to the right, I have here some of the tools of the trade. If any of you guys have an engineering or architectural background, you'll recognize some of this. There's, dividers, pencils, erasers, triangles, and of course the ubiquitous roll of tracing paper. To the right is an electric eraser. I use that a lot. Even when I'm doing a sketch that wants a little bit of texture change, I'll use the electric eraser and lift some of the lead off the paper to make that kind of sparkle. So it isn't just for correcting mistakes or errors or changes, it's for bringing a different level of life to a pencil drawing. This is a reduction wheel. I can measure the proportions of things. If I'm like over here, we have this sketch. I want to figure out what would this look like if I were to take it, say 75%, 175%. What would that look like? Well, I can put these dimensions in here, turn this dial, and I get the correct sizes for an enlargement or a reduction. And Jonathan got an interest up the other day when we were talking about this. That looks like a magnifying glass. Well, I do have one of those, but this is a reduction glass. You know, a magnifier is a double convex. A reduction glass is a double concave. So I can hold that up and it pushes the drawing that's in front of me visually. It pushes it away from me so I can see the whole thing and not have to stand up and walk away from the drawing. I can just hold that glass up. It's a really cool, unique tool of the trade. Not only do I use the desk for architectural style, or call them painting the possible kind of drawings, but I use the desk for oil paints, and this is a piece I will show you and tell you about a little bit later. But again, the paint box and paints and brushes and such work very well on that space. So in this piece, I'm working on a pencil drawing for the East Broad Top. And this is a good segue to the first of the four paintings that I'm going to be talking about today. This is East Broad Top 282, this is number 16, and the M1 gas electric car. The painting was commissioned by Bob Alkire, who might be on the Zoom meeting with us today. He was going to try to. At any rate, Bob approached the East Broad Top, and they worked out a financial situation where Bob would make a donation to the railroad, get that as a tax write-off, and the railroad would in turn pay me a portion of that to produce the painting, and the balance of that would be used to produce posters. So what you'll see here is how that arrangement unfolded. It started with discussions with Brad Esposito from the railway about settings that they might like for a painting that would feature the 16 as well as the M1. And Brad had an opportunity here. He said, I want to thank the friends of the East Broad Top, and I'd like to feature a couple of the projects that the friends have been involved with. So off to the left here are a couple of sheds, which were the beginning projects years ago that the Friends of the East Broad Top rebuilt. This is the under construction coaling facility as the most recent of the Friends projects a couple of years ago. So Brad suggested that I start with these kinds of photos and see where we go. And this was one of, probably 7 or 8 images. You can see, and perhaps some of you have been to East Broad Top, recognize this track in the foreground here is the main line, and up there in the background with the 2 stacks is the main shop building. That's the whole Rock Hill Furnace yard, and the station is off to the right, not visible. So this was one idea that Brad had. He suggested another possibility of kind of a semi-aerial looking down on this sort of spot from the former right-of-way where hopper cars were pushed up and coal dumped into the building. So you can see that that was the beginning structure of that facility, of the new facility. Well, we talked about those things. Didn't settle on anything for sure. Talked to Dan. Dan sent a number of pictures along, and this is one of them. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's the setting. I just knew it. And here's why. I had enough tracks that I could put trains on, M1 on one track, the M1 and a coach, and in the number 16, perhaps backed up here by the coaling facility. But I like the angle. I like what the painting did for composition. It's the wooded hillside. That's typical East Broad Top country. A ridge line in the background. You can't go anywhere on East Broad Top without having a mountain range. That's central Pennsylvania. Here's one of those buildings from the early work of the Friends. Here's the new one. Another thing that I liked about this was the coloring of it. This is a late afternoon, early evening photo that Dan took. And you get this warmth bouncing off the rails. So that gave me a composition that I liked. Dan sent this along, and here's the 16 in about the spot that it actually ended up in. You can see some stored hopper cars back there in the background, and again these buildings. This was part of the collecting of data. And if you looked at the earlier photo or the painting, you could see how I had the different layers of trees and the ridge in the background. I pulled the ridge forward. You know, I have an artistic license. I can do that, and so I can get the feel for what the setting looks like. So this then was the very first sketch. Parenthetically, a couple minutes ago, I was telling you about the electric eraser. You see all these kind of white dots that are in the trees? That was done with the electric eraser. Just hit it, kind of makes it sparkle a little bit. But this was a simple pencil drawing that got me to the next point. We would see where the coal tipple chutes are in the background. What's missing from this is the water plug, and you'll see that gets put in the next one, next iteration here. But I had a chance to get the locomotive, and then off to the right, the M1 and a car. But I didn't like it for one reason. The M1 and the coach were a little too far back. So in this version, a little bit looser, I brought the M1 and the car a little bit closer. That did what I wanted it to. And now I got a couple of people standing around here. This dude is talking to the engineman here. These guys are working up on top of the tender. It began to get some interaction and human presence, and I liked the composition. So then I traced this onto my canvas. And in a little while, I'll show you another one of those trace jobs with graphite paper. No detail here, just outlines. Then I start to put in color. I was telling Jonathan the other day that if you use watercolor, you go from light to dark If you go with oils, you go from dark to light. And often guys who paint in oils put a fairly thick layer of paint down. I don't do that right away. My style is very thin, almost watercolor-like thickness of just paint thinner, a little bit of paint medium, and the oils. So you can see what's going on here. A very rough layer of color in the sky and blocking out the trees, getting some color on the engine, the sheds, and the M1. And there's nothing done here in the foreground. This was just an hour or so into the painting, just roughing it out, getting a feel. Yes, I like this. No, I don't. Whatever. So from here on out, I begin a refining process. And this is going to be true for all of the images that I showed you today. So here now you see we have paint on the whole canvas. There's a little more color in the sky, and there's foreground shadow and brightness. You can now pick up the bright concrete reflecting that evening sun over here, as well as a little bit of reflection of the sky on the letterboard of the gas electric car. So I like the way the colors are going there. The next one takes it a couple of steps further. So look at this thing closely. You can see that there's been more work on the sky. All of these trees now have a lot of dimension to them. The coaling facility with a hopper car in it, even though that's not there now, but it's the EBT's goal to have that track restored, as I mentioned earlier, and they would push the cars up there. So they will do that at some point. And there's more detail here. But I want you to notice here, I've started working on the locomotive. And you see what's happening. I'm using a different style to get the flat tonality of the smoke box and the highly reflective black paint on the domes and the boiler. And just beginning to get that. So as you'll see, as the painting develops, that is a focal point for the whole composition. And here we have it with the locomotive essentially finished. These two guys are now pretty well roughed in, but you see not much has happened with the M1 at all. I've brought a little more of this reflected sky color into the side of the gas electric car, so I can begin to get a feel for how those colors move around the paper, or the canvas. So you have this blue up in the sky, you have some blue here on the side of the car, and the highly reflective side of the 16 engine. Almost done. Once again, I'm not going to walk through specifics, but you can get a feel now for how the foreground and the texture of the ballast, the rails, and all that color begins to work together. And this, I think, is the last image of the actual painting. And then East Broad Top had posters made, and here we see this. The title of this piece, Back at Work, really tells the story. And this was done a couple of years ago. So the locomotive is now back at work. It hadn't been used since 1956. And the M1 and the coach add another dimension to this story. Any of you who know this railroad know that this is the main line headed south, and it is the goal of the EBT Foundation to open that line bit by bit, and they are making great progress on that south through the town of Pogue and Three Springs to Saltillo. And Dan told me just the other day that the Friends of East Broad Top will be breaking ground for the rebuilt, or the station in Saltillo. So Dan and I used to spend hours sitting in my home or his in Pittsburgh, musing about the future of the East Broadtop. No way did we ever dream that we'd get to experience this. And Dan, living in Harrisburg, is just down the street, so to speak. So he gets to go there a lot. Anyway, so that's how that particular painting has come into being. So now we shift to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's number 1713, the Terrible Trolley. Some of you will recognize that term and that image. Others of you may not. But the story revolves around all these people down here in the lower left. They're all waving the black and gold terrible towels, which were brought into the football world by the Steelers in the early 80s. Car 1713, post-war St. Louis PCC, had, after the Port Authority Transit closed down the surface lines, that car was sold. It was not scrapped, it was sold and went through several owners. A couple of years ago, the car was donated back to the Trolley Museum in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is about 40 miles south of Pittsburgh. And the car is under restoration now and will probably be running this summer. When I was back there in May 2 years ago, I was talking with Scott Becker. Scott is the executive director and was very proud of the fact that the 1713 car was going to come back and be a part of their collection. It meant a lot to me. I remember seeing this car, probably rode it a few times, but the 1713 was a very played an important role in my trolley car history. When I was a junior high kid, I did several drawings that featured the 1713. So here now, I have an opportunity to paint it in a whole new configuration. So we'll walk through this. Scott provided me this late teens, early 20s, 1920s picture of the Smithfield Street Bridge in the background. We really can't see the bridge, but it's right back through there, through behind this canopy. This building here you see is the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railway Station. This is the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Annex building. Scott Becker and I talked about the setting. What would best tell a story, a Pittsburgh story? And he felt, as did others on his team, that the Smithfield Street Bridge and the P&LE station would be good. People would recognize that, they'd feel comfortable with it, they'd know it. So that that then became the starting point. Had an opportunity to get other historic photographs from the 70s or 80s. So here we see the 1700 series PCC interurban car, parenthetically, pilot, high headlight, coming off the Smithfield Street Bridge, and then here is the P&LE station off to the left. That overpass, or that canopy thing that you saw in the historic photo, was torn down in the 60s. I thought it would have been a great addition to the painting if it had been around as late as 1980. Scott agreed with me. He thought it would be a nice setting, but of course, the building was long gone by that time. So this, and then another one taken at the same time, shows the annex building to the left and another car in a slightly different position. I wasn't too thrilled with both of these. In this picture, the PCC car wasn't as close as I wanted it to be. And in the next one, I was getting too much of a side view. So I knew I was going to have to work this out in sketches. But you see what's important, at least here, is we see several cars coming off or on in the distance on the private right-of-way of the Smithfield Street Bridge. And here is again a late 80s image, and you can see the the structural work of the bridge and how cool that is. I wanted to get in some of that, and I wanted to get in some of this canopy to the P&L station, which has been restored, and there are a restaurant and shop kind of things all around there. It's known as Station Square. And here's how the building looks today. So I had this as a photo that showed it cleaned up, and it's a gorgeous facility. So a very loose sketch, maybe 15 minutes to draw this, 20 minutes. The idea of buildings in the background. There's a bridge, a couple of streetcars. Here's 1713, some people waving the terrible towel, and there's a rough idea of the P&LE station. I tried another version with the car a little further in, and off to the left you see here is the annex building. I didn't particularly like that. I did put in a traffic cop because there was always a cop there. Dan will remember this, flagging traffic, auto traffic on and off the Smithfield Street Bridge. Test of memory. How many of you remember Candid Camera? That great TV show of years past. Well, there was a Pittsburgh cop who showed up there, and he did all kinds of dance moves as he directed traffic. Well, sometimes he was at this intersection, so the guys at the Trolley Museum thought, well, let's put him in there. So that's what he's doing there, and you'll see him show up again here, standing on one leg and waving traffic. As we discussed it, we thought, well, we need the cop, but people who are not Pittsburghers would not recognize this, and they think, what's that weird guy doing there? We really want to tell the streetcar story more than the policeman's story. So that caused us to think through some options. And here's one, another sketch that gets the perspective a little more like I wanted, the position of the car, the position of the people, but the cop was not in here. I guess he went off for a cup of coffee. So the guys at the museum said, can you put him back in, but over on the left? So here he is now between these tracks, and he's waving this motorman and the 1713 car on. So this then became the basic composition for the painting. And in the same capacity as the earlier one, we end up roughing it out on the canvas and starting in some color. So you can see, begin to get a feel for this. You know, most of my paintings have trees in them. There's no, at least at this point, I don't know if I put any in because in 1980 they wouldn't have had any down here off to the left, even though there are today. So it's sort of a different exercise, a different set of images and tonality. But here you see, I was able to get in the entrance to the building that I wanted to, and which I pointed out to you earlier, that I really wanted. Wanted the distinctive shape and color of the Smithfield Street Bridge, various streetcars, and the policeman, and of course the family with the terrible towels. So this then, as that painting, as that composition came together, sent photos off to the, sent the photos off to the client. They loved it, and we were underway. And you can see here detailing beginning to show up in the P&LE building, these apartment buildings across the river, and the detailing of the Smithfield Street Bridge. And almost down to the end of the production here, the foreground was last. Often, or maybe I should say generally, I'll work from top to bottom after I get the whole canvas roughed in. I need to see the whole picture before I start detailing it. So when the paint is dry, I could go from top to bottom and not have to worry about smudging anything. And that's the case here. So then we end up with about the final piece. I think there was one more here. where I brought the rails a little closer together so it's a little more accurate, and that then is the final painting. This size, as well as the one for East Broad Top, were 16 by 24 inches. And in this case, the museum went for a poster, and you can see how that turned out. Same situation. We have the Pat Transit logo there, and the Washington or Pennsylvania Trolley Museum logo to the right. And Terrible Trolley lives on my canvas and will be back in service soon. So now we go from Pittsburgh, jump to the east end of the state, and I want to walk you through the production of a painting for the Reading and Northern, or painting of Reading and Northern 2102. Dan knows this. I wanted to paint this locomotive for a long time, and very seldom do I do a painting that I just want to do. And I had some time, a year and a half or so ago, and I thought, well, I'm going to start this and just see where it goes. So what you'll see here now is the beginning again of research material and sketches to get into the final piece. Dan sent a number of photos. This was just after 2102 was outshopped and was doing break-in runs. This is a freight train. Dan, where, if you're on here, where can you tell us where this setting is? I guess he's not on. At any rate, I told him what I wanted with the train in different configurations, and the camera angle could be a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So Dan echoed that or respected that and sent a number of images, this being one good one for me to work with. And again, I was interested in this gloss, the highly freshly painted boiler. Another image, a little bit closer, featured this at the town of Nesquehoning. And I rather liked this setting. Nesquehoning was a typical Pennsylvania coal patch town. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in the bituminous region, and this is what I knew as a kid. But it was same kind of architecture, same kind of railroad down the middle of the street kind of thing in anthracite or hard coal area of eastern Pennsylvania. I tried the first sketch was sort of a combination of some other photos that Dan had sent. And what I was kind of getting at here was, what would this look like in a typical farm scene with a farmhouse, pitched roof, barns, ridgeline in the background. I liked the look of it. The sumac down here. Again, you see I'm using the electric eraser to lift some of the lead off the paper just to give it a little bit of sparkle. But I decided I would go with Nesquehoning, and I went back and did this little sketch next. I had to have some kids and had to have dog, so we got to put the dog in there. But I liked this feel of the train right in the heart of the town. So what I mentioned earlier about graphite paper is now shown here. So after I liked that sketch, ran it by Dan just for his input, and then I enlarged it, cut the enlargements apart, taped them together, stuck them down on the canvas, and then between the photocopied enlargement and the canvas, I put the black graphite paper. So I'd use a pencil and I would just trace over those lines, and which is what I've shown you in the other pieces. But that's how I get it from the sketch onto the canvas. Once again, starting in on the rich color of this scene, autumn scene, and again the bright blue reflecting off the locomotive boiler, and other color too. Dan and I have talked over the years about the way artists like Griff Teller did this reflective treatment so effectively, and I've always admired it. And you can see now we're getting some the background foliage, the purple shadows, the orange with the morning sun on that, and again the refined detailing on the boiler and running board area of the 484. So now you can see how the running gear is all completed, but there's been very little action done here on the smoke box front and the pilot. But of course that happened next, and as that developed, so did other areas. So here we have the kids and the dog. Kids interacting with the engineman. The dog is entertaining. The dog is engaging with the locomotive, and so then you can see how, and in some of my work, many of my paintings actually, I use a lot of shadow work in the foreground to kind of lead the viewer's eye into the composition and also provide almost kind of like a frame, and that's what's happening here. A little more detail. The houses now are about done, and here we have the final painting with shadows and the shadow of the locomotive on that grassy area. And here's a fun piece to close this portion of the show. Warren Hellbach, friend of Dan's and now one of my friends from Eastern Pennsylvania, and well, the three of us and a few other people were chasing the 2102 a couple years ago. So Warren knew that we would be going to Nesquehoning, so he said, "Let's get a picture of you, Craig, with a print of the 2102 as the 2102 is coming into the very same scene that I painted." So these houses right here are these houses right here. And it's a fun piece. I really thank Oren for the creativity in staging that. He did not slow down the train. He just took it as it went by. But anyhow, that was kind of fun. So now we're going to shift from historic and contemporary rail equipment and rail settings to architectural rendering style. This is one of the pieces that was done for the High-Speed Rail Alliance in Chicago. I mentioned that a little while ago. You may know, some of you may know, that Chicago is working to come up with a new international air terminal at O'Hare. And that's what this in the background, this rather triangular, almost boomerang-shaped kind of facility is all about. This is a current parking garage, although these buildings that are on that site now are not there. Those are just in the minds of the architects. Here's the CTA entry as sort of a cutaway in this picture, CTA's entrance to this terminal at O'Hare. Rick Harnish wanted me to come up with a concept that would show in a cutaway fashion what high-speed rail would look like or could look like entering into this set of terminals at O'Hare. So I had a lot of design freedom. We worked together with or based upon the drawings of the new terminal concept. But Rick and I put this together. So I was really appreciative of the commission, and it gave me a chance to work some of my industrial design skills and architectural skills into a concept painting. And if some of you guys know the book, my Indiana book that came out 2 years ago, I broke it down into three main areas: painting the past, painting the present, and painting the possible. And this is very much a painting the possible kind of image. And that topic, that kind of subject, that concept generally will warrant this ink and watercolor technique. So what you're seeing here is what I introduced when I showed you the drawing on the studio in the studio. This started out the same kind of way. That was the Detroit picture, but this is O'Hare. So again, starting with rough ideas. What's best going to tell the story is the question that I asked. What does my client, as the High-Speed Rail Alliance, want to show the viewer? What do they hope will come out of that? Will there be a move to architecturally incorporate high-speed rail? How will that tie into the proposed new terminal? All those kind of questions start with this kind of sketch. So here we have well, there are a couple of different towers. This is one. I think this is the one that is still there. There might be another one. But at any rate, you see what I'm beginning to get at here is this cutaway. If we were to slice through the ground, and then over here, there's roadway around this hotel, and on that level, you could go up to this upper level, or you could go down to a mezzanine and then down again to the platform level. I rather liked that feel, but we, for a variety of reasons, kind of shifted that. But one of the things that I did would do some just straight on site plan kind of looking straight down on it. But to go back one image, you can see how the use of perspective really tells the story here. A lot of people don't understand understand sight drawings. It's a spatial challenge for a lot of people. So that's where the perspective really helps to bring those folks on board and not have them guess at something. Well, we're getting thunder here this afternoon. Jonathan, I better rush through. We don't want to get cut off here. So here's another version of this with rendering perspective that we were leaning toward with trains, and this would be, you would see the note for CTA and then high-speed rail corridors. That then led to this version, which, if you remember the colored painting with which I opened this section, this was the introductory piece to that. And it gets a little more resolved as we go along. And you can see now here there are two of these towers, the control towers. This one is the one that exists at this particular terminal. This would be a new one. And now we have a more fully developed corridor with the different levels getting up to the parking area and then up to this covered area where passengers could get into the actual terminal. Once again, just a little more detailing, a little more playing around with some architectural themes to make this mezzanine space visually interesting and inviting. So here you can see I've had these little towers, these glass towers, and some wooden elements and some planting areas, and the elevator and escalator banks that would go up into that corridor. After we decided on all those details, then I took my sketch, put architectural drawing film down on top of it, and traced it all in ink. And this was probably about a 24 by 30 composition. So everything you see here is ink using a micron fine tip marker. And then I take that drawing, photocopy it onto watercolor paper, which is in turn mounted on some kind of heavy cardboard backing, and then I start adding color. So what you see here then is the development of everything from the new building at the top to these office buildings here that are setting on top of the parking garage to the main focal point right there. Nobody has chosen any colors for high-speed trains there. So Rick and I came up with this red and white and gray concept as a way to really provide a visual focus from the blues and grays and greens and browns from the background. That draws your eye to the foreground. So here's a detail of that, detail photograph, and you can see how we have these elevator towers to get you from this mezzanine level down to the platform level. There'd be shops, as you can see here, and if this were to be built, there'd be shops all around the thing on the mezzanine. And in this central court area, the mezzanine opens up so you could look down onto the platform level. Same going on over here. So therein is the final piece. So now I'm going to just run through a handful of relatively recent paintings. Some of you may have seen these. Others, they will be new to you. You know, I've done a number of paintings of the Empire Builder in Glacier Park. And last summer, Scott Tanner, whom many of you may know, Scott and his wife Jan commissioned this painting of Belton West Glacier on Amtrak 7. And in this case, if you know that train and you know that setting, you know that there's something quite out of kilter here. There's far too much sunlight in this painting. Scott wanted a westbound train, number 7, but it would be a very dark painting. And we decided that we would make this painting as a companion piece to the one of East Glacier, which had morning sun. And so I just, in this case, moved the sun with that artistic license. It gave me some options. We have one of the red buses and a rack of inflatables with a school bus taking passengers, or well, at this hour they wouldn't be going to start their trip down the middle fork of the Flathead on the raft, but that's typical of the of what you'd see there all day long. And then the Belton Chalet here in the background. So this piece was released a year ago, and it's being sold at the Belton station, as well as the Belton Chalet, pardon me, and also the East Glacier Lodge. So this was the final poster of the Michigan Central building that I showed you at the outset of the program. This is an oil painting, which is unusual because it's done in a classic style. And often, as I've said, I use a ink and watercolor concept rendering style for this kind of a commission. But Rick Harnish wanted me to use oils and come up with a painting that sort of echoed some of the style of classic railroad art, hence the way I treated the sky and the clouds. And the building, you can see the perspective, the forced perspective here adds to the drama of the piece. The trains are based on a contemporary Chinese consist, and it's a suggestion of what could be. What's intriguing to me, I was in England and Scotland a couple of years ago, and in York, England, is the National Railway Museum. Kathy and I were walking from that back through the train station to our hotel, and I saw some brand new railroad art done in this style of the new trains that the Brits were going to be using on that line. And it was really refreshing to see the art continues to be commissioned. And I'm glad that people like High Speed Rail have seen fit to retain me from time to time. I like this poster a lot, and I really like the white border and then the blue echoing the blue in the sky. It's really snappy, and I think that they ought to be really proud of the way they set their story out there. You saw this painting. It was sitting on the easel on my desk. The story behind this is a private commission, and it was commissioned by Joe and Meg McHugh. Joe is the retired vice president of Amtrak. He and Meg have this 1920s home near DC, and they've had it for a number of years. In fact, Joe bought it long before he was married, and he and his brother had it for a good while. It butts up on the right-of-way of one of the old DC Transit suburban streetcar lines. So when I was visiting with Joe and Meg about a year and a half ago, they said, we want to commission a painting from you that shows our house and the shed as it is today. But we want you to put the streetcar in as it would have been, as well as the mile marker and the zone. So that's why we have this combination. And as Jonathan aptly pointed out, oh yes, you've got a dog in there too. Yes. So this painting is now, the original is hanging in Joe and Meg's living room, right inside that house. But it's really been it was a great joy to work with them and see this piece develop and bring the character to what they wanted as a notable original painting of their home and the streetcar line. This is another relatively recent painting of the Phoebe Snow, actually two, eastbound and westbound of the old Lackawanna. I have two colleagues who grew up along the main line of the Lackawanna. One of them never had a chance to ride. Well, actually, neither of them had a chance to ride the Phoebe Snow. But one of them in particular knew that at some point he wanted to commission a painting. So he suggested a setting, and that's what this was just for that private commission. Some of you may know the Mark Twain Zephyr. This was commissioned by the Wisconsin Great Northern a few years ago, one of several paintings that show that distinctive 30s era streamliner in, again, a pretty snappy fall setting. And I don't really remember the name of the river here, but it's near Trego, Wisconsin. And then the last painting to show you today is a collection of paintings. Over the course of a number of years, I did probably 70 paintings for a client named Unicover. They were in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they did stamp collecting and coin collecting products. One of those commissions featured 50 locomotives. Dan chose the locomotives and the settings because he was the fellow who was commissioned to write the accompanying text, and I did the paintings. There were 50, one for each state of the Union. And these were released in smaller posters that were about 10 by 12, and then they were done on first day covers or cachets for collectors as well. A second set of images was that featuring notable streamliners. The artist Ted Rose was commissioned by the post office to paint stamps, and Unicover commissioned me to paint the cachet image, which included the same locomotive that Ted Rose used on his USPS stamps. So there are a few of those in this setting, like this one of the 4449, or here's, speaking of the Pensy, as we were talking earlier, there's GG1, an early E unit on the Santa Fe. And so there were, and there's a New York Central Hudson. So the folks at Unicover and the company that took them over issued this jigsaw puzzle, I guess a year or two ago, called Railroads of America. And it's a real treat for me to see it. I'm glad that they did it, and I'm honored that they are getting such good use out of the images. So it's an appropriate piece here to use this as a closing image for our time together. I've given you a lot of information. I hope I've answered a lot of questions, and in a sense, I'd say I'm really glad to put the pieces together, like we did here with this puzzle, to put the pieces together to show you how typically I work, and other artists as well, to bring these rail settings, these rail images to life. So this is a grand opportunity, and I say thank you all for the roles that you've played in either commissioning some art from me or embracing what I do and sharing your vision. So I'm glad to be a part of the team. And Jonathan, thank you very much for setting this up today.
Well, Craig, I mean, it's just an honor and a pleasure to be able to work with you on programs like this, and to be able to just be able to share with people sort of what it takes to be creative, which, of course, I'm an accountant, so I'm exempt from that. But it's just very interesting. And let's see, for questions, let's see here. I know that we'll always get a few questions from the audience. One of the questions I had, Craig, is what is Shannon Drake? I noticed that in the Pittsburgh paintings. Is that a route or a location, or what is that exactly?
Good question, Jonathan. Shannon Drake is one of the interurban cutbacks. Pittsburgh Railways had two interurban lines, true interurban lines that went south out of Pittsburgh. They shared right of way part of the way, and then they split. One went to Washington, PA, and the other went to Charleroi on the Monongahela River. In 1953, they cut those back just essentially to the Allegheny County line. And the Washington line was cut back to a loop at Drake. The other one was cut back to the town of Library. Shannon is an intermediate town. Castle Shannon is the name that I grew up with, knowing it, and it's still called Castle Shannon. So the cars that were signed to Shannon Drake, they would go on the line to Castle Shannon and then on to the loop at Drake, turn around, and then go back into Pittsburgh. Shannon Library, same kind of thing.
Okay, well, now we know. And so, Craig, I'm going to ask a question about you to one of our audience members. And because I want to kind of sort of, take what you're doing and sort of dimensionalize it. So, Patrick Durand, we saw an Alaska Railroad 557 painting in Craig's presentation today. And without getting into too much of the details, you used that as some sort of a fundraiser, and how did that turn out exactly?
Craig has been doing work for Alaska West Express and Linden Transport here for years. One of their officers suggested that we contacted Craig when I approached the subject of doing a piece of art for a fundraiser for the organization. I have to say, I get tongue-tied and emotional when I discuss our relationship with Craig. Just an offshoot, and I'll come back to what we do with the image. Craig has artistic license. He uses perspective. He turns a three-dimensional piece of paper into 4 dimensions by adding color, and a fifth dimension that's hard to describe, but it's occupation. There are people in the scene, and the more you watch it, the more you look into the scene, it sucks you right in. You become part of it. You observe it from within the image. And that is something that no camera can or ever has done. So I compliment you, Craig, because there are a lot of people can do an impression here, and they have all kinds of artistic ability, but you combine these things into unbelievable images that are believable. We took a $5,000 investment, handed it to Craig for an image. Within 2 weeks, I had pencil sketches back. Within 3 weeks, I had some color renderings back. I think it was maybe a month and a half, 2 months, we had a finished painting. And I turned to Craig and I says, okay, I need you to manage the printing of these because I know it will be done right. And I said, how many do you think we should print? And he came back with 557.
Go figure.
Yeah, there's some math for you.
Yeah, that took some brain power. And I'll tell you, today I have 223 of the 557 left. We sold them for $100 a piece. We still sell them for $100 a piece. And when I have a brick and mortar gift shop, we'll be selling them until they're gone. People come to me and they say, gee, we'd like you to donate something for our fundraiser. And I say, okay, I have this wonderful signed print by J. Craig Thorpe right here. Out the door, it cost me about $7 to be that big contributor. I've raised I've raised $37,000 on Craig's artwork over the years. My $5,000 investment was gold.
It's a return on investment, isn't it?
Yeah, great return. So again, thank you, Craig.
Well, you're welcome, Patrick, and thank you. I agree. I love the interaction, the interplay with you all. It is one of those highlights, and I am really grateful for that.
Well, as I recall, didn't you folks didn't Craig do something with your museum there in the Portland area? Do I have that right, or am I thinking of somebody else? Okay, all right, just checking. I wasn't sure. So, in our esteemed audience, George, do you have George Foster, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one to Craig. I think the best thing about your paintings, especially in the East, are the close proximity to homes there. We have somewhat similar things like through Tacoma and everything, but it's easy to see how closely spaced Appalachia is all along the mountain range, whether it's West Virginia, Pennsylvania, in the Carolinas, whatever. So trains are real personal to people there.
Yeah.
And then to Patrick, I need a contact information for you because I'd like one of those 557s because July 23rd of this year will mark 50 years since I boarded an aircraft and left Alaska as a member of the U.S. Air Force. So I'd like to use that as a reminder of my service.
Fantastic. John,
I'll
Jonathan,
make a point to introduce you two guys, okay? I'm writing
you.
it down right now. So
thank you, George.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much. So you know, it would be remiss on my part, Craig, if we didn't talk to one of the other great artists in our program today, and that would be our dear friend, Jack Christensen. Jack, are you there?
He's
Jack,
there.
how are you today? And what have you been doing?
Just survival mostly. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yep.
hear you loud and clear. You sound
Thank you.
great. We
Yeah.
don't hear any chipmunks or
Yeah.
anything. So tell us what you know, tell
Yeah.
tell me
Well,
more.
I got a birthday coming up in June. We'll start my 100th year. So I've done a lot of railroad paintings, but they're not too well known, I guess. And quite a few paintings of Foss tugs in the calendar contest over 30 years, but I don't get much publicity on the artwork. I think some of my stuff is hanging around the Burien place. But at this stage of lifetime, survival is getting to be a primary goal, I guess. And I do have a couple of art projects coming up. One of our son's friends buying a new sailboat. I always do a painting of their sailboat for them. And outside of that, possibly a poster for the convention in St. Paul of the NPRHA. It's the combined convention, the Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and SPNS. So I'm waiting for the head honcho to decide what kind of a poster he would like. We'd like to depict all three railroads, the Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and the SPNS. I don't know how that's going to work out, but that's the art projects are kind of few and far between now.
Are you doing any for the Northwest Rail Museum?
Any what?
Any paintings for the Northwest Rail Museum right now? Do you have any of those?
Snoqualmie.
No,
Snoqualmie, yeah.
I did do their Christmas card every year.
Mhm.
That's the thing that Richard and I have been having for years. And we done the Christmas card. Of course, I worked that line both in steam and diesels when it was not an active branch of the Northern Pacifics. So we get together and decide what they'd like to depict. That's just my little contribution to the Snoqualmie group every year.
Well, it's appreciated, and
Yeah.
you know, because of your history, I think that makes it all the more special for people.
Yeah. Well, all the locomotives that I've painted, most of them, I touched the steel on them, you know. I fired them and ran them. A lot of good memories of the branch lines, and everything I do is, you know, all the equipment that I did, everything I painted, I actually worked on.
Well, very good, Jack. And it's great seeing you, and it always makes me smile when I see you, you know, joining our program every other week. So it's
Well,
just
I tell
great
you,
having you.
to get up to this number of years, the emphasis is more on survival than anything else, getting from one day to the next. But so far, we're still hanging in there, and hopefully, I'm recovering from
a fractured femur, and it. I think we're making progress, but still pretty lame and unable to drive. I have a couple of dollars that takes me where I need to go. I can't even get my hearing aids fixed, but we have to be taken everywhere. But we're trying to keep connected one day at a time.
Well, hopefully 14 days at a time later, you'll be back here in 2 weeks for our next program.
Well, I always look forward to the next Zoom meeting. Having pretty good luck connecting anyway.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And, folks, just as a reminder, Jack and I have done a couple of different programs with Gary Tarbox over the years. And a lot of that programming exists on our YouTube channel, where Jack and I, last year, we did a couple of programs together. And I know Gary was an equal partner in all those affairs, if not the managing partner, I should say. And we had some fun times, talking about some of the things that we've, that were in your career. Because as I recall, Jack, because see, my uncle is the same age as you to the day, pretty near. My uncle is June 18th. What's your birthday?
June 16th.
Oh my gosh, you both could be 100 years old within 2 days of each other. It's unbelievable.
Well, we're starting a 100th year. Actually, it'll be 99, but
right.
We're not counting.
Now you realize that Calvin Coolidge was president when you were born.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. I don't know if it's you sometimes wonder where it's all going, but I guess we just have to take it as it comes. I don't really envy these guys that like Ralph Monroe. He toddles off at age 71 or 81, whatever. The longevity has its negative aspects, but we just deal with them as we can. I'm pretty lucky to have the support I do have, and we're still enjoying life more or less. I'm actually going to start building a rubber-powered model airplane like I used to do when I was a kid. But my daughter's talked me into tackling that. And like I do have a couple art projects, the sailboat, and possibly the poster for the fall convention it's the combination NP and GN, SP and S. So when I get the word from the guy in charge, we're going to try to come up with a poster. That's the only sort of railroad art project I've got in the works right now. I'm thankful I'm still not shaking, so maybe we'll try another watercolor anyway.
Right. Well, thanks, Jack, for checking in and spending a few minutes and kind of updating us on what you've been up to. We're actually past the bottom of the hour now, so I do need to sort of bring today's thrilling episode to its ultimate conclusion. And just as a reminder, these programs, like every program that we're doing these days at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, we're going to be putting this up on YouTube later this afternoon. And what you do there is Craig Thorpe YouTube and Google that, and it'll pop up. And that way, how we do it has evolved, and the way we're doing it now, we get these things up online, the same day, because people want to see this stuff. And Craig, I know some of your friends couldn't be here, but you'll have a link and you can go, hey, look, you can watch the program here. So,
hey, Jonathan, before you close this up, I just want to say again, thank you very much. It's good to see you all. And I look forward to opportunities when our paths cross, no matter what state. And also want to say, Dan, it's such a treat to see you there and to work with you in this ongoing way. I count this as one of the highlights of my life. So thank you.
There you have it, a testimonial, dear friend. Second time today. So, Craig is, I am going to say this as a spoiler alert. Craig is always one of my favorite guests. And so, we were going to have him on last fall and we had that bomb cyclone and he lost power. So I would just tell you as a spoiler alert that the idea that you'll see Craig on another one of these programs in the next year or so is probably a pretty safe bet because Craig and I enjoy each other's company and he's got great stories and we learned I've watched this now and I know more. It doesn't help, but I do know more. So just a reminder, April 5th at Vashon, Frank Zellerhoff and I will be doing a presentation on Milwaukee Road Pier 27. On that note, I contacted the Port of Seattle and they had done an article on the barge back in 1969. And a very nice person at the Port of Seattle sent me 107 images, only of which 8 made the publication. So over 100 new images to look at, all sorts of interesting information about the barge. April 9th, Georgie Lee will be talking about the restoration of the Cheney Depot. April 12th, Frank and I will be at the Highline Heritage Museum reprising his Pier 27 presentation. And we're also going to be doing a second presentation with Frank on his life and career and family and growing up on Vashon and all of that. April 23rd, PNRA Board President Russell Holter will be here talking about Cascade Rail Foundation. And by then, hopefully, I'll have some interesting news on Cascade Rail Foundation. We're been doing a lot and we got a lot of stuff near the goal line, but I've got a couple of things that maybe in a couple of weeks I can talk more about, which I'm looking forward to. So does anybody have anything more for the good of the order before we adjourn for this bi-weekly session? Going once, going twice. So again, thanks to our special guest, J. Craig Thorpe, and to our audience, thanks for everybody being here. If I didn't have an audience, there wouldn't be much point in doing this. So, the credit goes to you, long-suffering viewers, for enduring yet another episode. So with that, I'm going to say have a great day. Avoid any weather, calamities in your neighborhood. And Russ Segner, you're on my list of people to talk to, and I'll be getting a hold of you in the not too distant future. On that happy note, I am going to conclude our program today. Thanks everyone for being here and hope to see you in 2 weeks.